Hi everyone and welcome to your daily tarot guidance. Now today's cards are a little bit different because they can play out in very different ways for different people, especially the Emperor card, because the Emperor represents our own sovereignty. It represents that we are in full control over our lives and everything that happens to it, one way or another. May it represent physical reality where we are responsible for our own survival basically, but may it represent a very spiritual perspective where we are also responsible for our karmic past, regardless if it has that much to do with this current existence, or if we have inherited much more of our karmic past from previous existences and from our family of origin, basically. And this is exactly where the Emperor, for some people in this current context, it represents that they're waking up to the fact that they need to take full control of their lives and they cannot depend on anyone else. They cannot depend on any kind of help, any kind of guidance, any kind of advice, especially coming from society or centralized power or their representatives, while for other people, the Emperor signifies an act of rebellion, an inner awakening, which might not be the most positive expression of this energy because it fills them with rage, it fills them with anger. Of course, it is a very justified anger because all of us, one way or another, are waking up to the fact that just 2 or 3 months ago, our lives used to be so very different, even from a psychological perspective, because our sense of normality was rigid and stable. Yes, of course, this has so very many bad expressions where we are slaves, we are imprisoned in our own lives, our rights and liberties are very subjective and all that, but at the same time, the most positive expression of this is that we had a sense of security because we knew that certain decisions that we have made in our lives in the distant past, for example, that big saving, for example, all of our investments that we have made, all the sacrifice, time and effort we have invested into our careers. Now all of this was meant to offer us a very long-term stability, groundedness, and at the same time the security to know that regardless what happens, we are going to be safe, our families are going to be safe, all those people who we love dearly are going to be safe. And this is where, for example, all the insurances, social security, all those contributions, all those, for example, payment plans, all the banking and everything, well, those basically served us more psychologically than any other way because that represented our security, that represented that we have made a very wise investment, an investment which the rest of society, the collective centralized power basically, the structures of society are going to be protecting and guarding, and that basically means that we invested time, effort, sacrifice and resources into them, but they are basically serving us back by guaranteeing that our investments, our sacrifices, our so-called wise choices, wise actions are always going to serve our greatest good. But this is where just 2 months ago all of that went into ruin. This is where we're waking up to the fact that even our wisest actions in the past, may it be the very distant past where we have made big investments, for example 20 years ago, or just recently, well, those already have absolutely no guarantee that they're going to be serving us in the distant future. And for some people, this is an absolute shock. Only in this present moment do they realize, are they waking up to the fact may it be very rationally, where they know the numbers and the calculations, and maybe they have relevant studies in economic domains, or maybe just instinctually or intuitively, that this is where everything that used to represent security and safety and all of that, especially materially, in the past, is no longer valid. And this is like a massive deception to some people, or for some people, just a shock that they have to do this all over again. That nothing that they didn't done in the past, whereas it required a lot of effort and sacrifice, regardless how. Yes, for some people, for example, it was much easier because they had the support of their families, maybe an inheritance and all that. So that was a little bit easier, but it was still a sacrifice and an effort where they were 1,000,000% convinced that it was wise to take this action. But here it is that old wisdom is so very susceptible to questions, to doubts in the present moment, because right now we have absolutely no guarantee that we are going to be safe at all, that we are going to have a very materially stable future at all, because in the present moment, the economic crisis, the food crisis, the famine, the weather-related problems which can affect agriculture, and everything related to this represents a massive problem which takes away our future security. And once again, we come back to that emperor where it doesn't matter that our outer realities, our social security, our social structures just collapsed in front of our eyes, because that changes basically nothing. It is still our own responsibility to provide for ourselves and to create a very stable, secure and safe future. So basically this is the moment when the emperor can take so very many different symbolism for different people, because for some people this is strengthening them, this is showing them that the decisions they didn't make in the past, for example, that they didn't invest in properties or their social security and whatever, was actually a very inspired choice, because in this present moment none of that will matter. While for other people, this represents an act of rebellion and inner uprising, where they feel so very deceived, they feel conned basically by centralized power, and they don't just put the blame on other people, they also feel as if they lived a self-deception, because they believed with all the power of their being, with all their heart, that investing, that, working the normal way around their long-term security was the very wisest choice they could possibly make. And this is where the deception is so very obvious. Yes, of course, this isn't like the kind of deception where they see it like very bad intent, but at the same time, the bad intent is very subjective, because we should have thought of all of this. Pandemics and, sudden moments of crisis, weather changes, geographic changes, and all of this is nothing new. Humanity went through this over and over and over again in the past, in the distant past, even in the not so distant past. For example, in my culture in the 70s, there was a massive earthquake which just razed the whole country, and people had to rebuild. But of course, it doesn't matter in the present moment. I'm just trying to say that this is the moment where it sinks in that we are kind of alone in this mess. And by alone, I mean that we cannot rely upon society, centralized power, the social structures to rescue us this time, because the future is so very uncertain for everyone equally, and this is not where we can just hope for a miracle that the professionals, that the big people, that the big thinkers are going to figure everything out, because there is no unity, and this is so very obvious to all of us. So if society isn't united, people are not standing against one single banner of solidarity and mutual help, especially from an ideological perspective, because the emperor is the head. It can represent our political, religious, sociological, philosophical perspectives, our worldviews, our beliefs. So basically, whatever we choose to tune into. And yes, this is the moment where all of us are waking up that we don't have even a principle to ground ourselves into. This is where the only security that we can have is our sense of optimism, our hope, or the solid and practical rationality of our minds, knowing that, well, it doesn't matter what happens and what doesn't, we still have the power, the inner power, to solve the situation, at least personally, if not collectively. And this is where a different kind of wisdom comes in, whereas our forefathers, our ancestors, have been through maybe much worse, the world wars and all of that, and their reality shattered just like ours in this present moment, yet they still found the strength, they found the wisdom and the determination ultimately to make it through and rebuild everything. So this gives us the security that we can do the same, and the fact that that ace of coins, our sense of normality, our earthly material groundedness, our stability, our well-being, is very questionable for the future. Well, that doesn't really matter because we have the inner power to solve any situation and to handle everything, as long as we know that we are responsible for our own happiness and of course for our own material earthly well-beings. And of course this is where the ace of coins takes on a totally different kind of interpretation, because the ace of coins can represent a divine gift of stability, of prosperity, of earthly well-being. And this is where, for some people, in this very important karmic pivotal point, turning point, means different things, because all those people who were blessed one way or another by the divine with material stability and prosperity, all of a sudden have to give it up, or they're going to lose it one way or another, even if they just lose it psychologically, where they don't no longer believe that they're 100% million safe because of their money and their material gains and their treasures, basically. That is already the ace of coins reversed, because the divine gave that to them at one point and now it takes it back. Whereas for some people who lived very, materially unstable lives, who struggled a lot, who just couldn't find that stability in their lives in the past, well, for them it's that much easier, because life is not different in this present moment. If anything, the social instability brings them new and fresh opportunities, and this is where the divine is going to give them options, opportunities, future stability, exactly by this big chaos. And this is where the Ten of Cups, the card which closes the reading, is more like a divine guidance, that it doesn't really matter how our situations are in the present moment. It is not really doom and gloom for everyone, because all of this changes very, very soon. Or better said, all of us are transitioning in this massive change, in this continuous instability, which, according to my calculations, is going to be an ongoing theme over the next 6 months of our lives. But this is not necessarily a negative thing, because it is giving us time to adapt ourselves, to embody flexibility, versatility, to get rid of our rigid beliefs and our rigid attitudes, basically, our comfort zones. So basically, this emperor is turning into a warrior, into a conqueror, because his throne is unstable. He is basically getting ready to take off his crown, to abandon his scepter, his throne, his kingdom, and to take on his armor and his sword and go and fight new battles. But for that, he needs to be like a proper warrior. He needs to embody his warrior spirit. So he has to be flexible, he has to be ambitious, he has to be very determined, and most importantly, he has to be compassionate, because he cannot become a tyrant. He cannot just conquer something with bloodlust and survival mentality, because that is basically repeating the past. And he already knows that if he takes on a very aggressive, a very rigid attitude, that is going to be his undoing. So the emperor, if the emperor represents our inner Mars, our inner warrior spirit, then we have to be warriors of love, that 10 of cups, the card of emotional fulfillment, the card of emotional completion. So we're not just fighting for ourselves, for our own well-being, but we're also fighting for our loved ones, we're fighting for our families, we're fighting for our community. We are fighting to become assets, to become valuable additions, members of our community, where we can fill, the whole collective with our gifts, with our talents, the emperor with our passions, ambitions. We can actually make this world a much better place as soon as we start embodying who we are, as soon as we take on the symbolic sword of that emperor and start going into the fight. And first of all, that fight represents tactics and knowing our inner truth, knowing what we desire. And most of us simply desire that 10 of cups, a life of peace, a life of somewhat freedom, a life where we can be peace with other people, where we can just do our own thing and living life, just being ourselves and doing everything that we can as human beings to make the lives of others a little bit more beautiful. Well, that is already the pylon, the support column of a future that empowers all of us equally, and where the Ace of Coins, the divine gift of stability, of earthly existence, takes on a higher octave of what it has always been, of what it used to be in the past. This is where the future is about much more than just food in our bellies, a roof over our heads, just going mindlessly into work and doing that 8-hour slavery and returning home with the money. This is where existence and being part of a community takes on a totally different paradigm. Of course, this is just a massive work of progress in the present moment, and that's exactly why the Ace of Coins is reversed. We're trying to get there, but before we can do anything physically, we have to do a lot mentally, a lot emotionally. This is where we have to embody that emperor. Now the reading is closed by the Justice reversed and the Three of Wands, and this is telling us, the Justice reversed, that the legal systems, the laws, the rules, the regulations, what justice means in an earthly representation is also collapsing. It is also changing, but before it can change, it has to become very visible, directly perceivable to all of us that it is failing, that it needs a massive upgrade, that it needs to be reconfigured because it's no longer serving us the way we are in the present moment. This is where, for example, maybe basic human rights can no longer be sovereignly guaranteed by any state, because the threat of the virus or this global crisis is that much bigger. But in the present moment, the Three of Wands, we are trying to find new perspectives, we are trying to find a way to fix it. But in order for us to do that, we need to reach one singular conclusion, which all of us can adapt, all of us can, take on, all of us can believe in. And this won't come very easily because, 3 is not a very stable number, Three of Wands. So we are looking for new and fresh perspectives, but that requires us to overcome a lot of challenges. It requires us to turn inner stress into motivation and not allow it to send us into fears and panics, because as soon as we look at things in a very fearful manner, that blocks our vision, that blocks our perspectives, and it shows us that earthly justice is very unfair, and it can trigger us, anger us, and cause a lot of uprisings, to be honest. Because not every single individual has the wisdom and the emotional maturity not to instantly rebel in a very violent and direct manner against injustice when our legal systems fail us, when the law and rules and regulations aren't respected by those people who put them in place in the first place. So basically, this is where things are getting even more complicated, but as long as we embody that emperor, our sense of duty towards ourselves, towards our beings, then we are already at a higher ground. We're already looking at everything as observers, as an outsider, just assessing the situation, after which we can have the clarity, we can have the plan, we can have the rational approach to start doing things differently and somehow get in harmony with each other, and not just individuals, but for example nations, countries, allies, political parties within the state, etc., where we just reach that state of unity which is necessary to start rebuilding, to start upgrading everything, and to open the doors to our future, basically. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a blessed and safe day. Until next time, bye for now.